Hey everybody, welcome to DadsDen of Pop Culture. Today we are saluting one of the greatest comedians of the 20th century, and one that probably wasn't even a household name when they were at their height in the 20th century. I am speaking of Frank Tashlin, writer, animator, director, who worked in numerous mediums and always with the utmost of quality. I've loved this guy's work for a long time, and I just wanted to do a little roundup of just some of the funniest things this guy ever did. He got his start in, whatever you want to call it, creativity in 1929, starting for a couple years with Fleischer and Fleischer Studios. By 1930, he was working for Van Buren Studios, and he would stay there until about 1933. Now, one of the cartoons that he worked on while he was there was called A Fireman's Life. It's from 1933. It is a Tom and Jerry cartoon, not the cat and the mouse. Tom and Jerry, the first Tom and Jerry in animation, were these two guys. And Tom and Jerry is actually the name of this sort of hot wintertime kind of a cocktail, almost like a form of eggnog. So Tom and Jerry got used a lot for things. This was directed by Vernon Stallings and Tashlin. It's basically about these two firemen who have to go to a fire, as you would expect. You get, all the firemen sort of gags that you would expect in this one. The horse is sort of the standout for me in the cartoon. They wake him up for this fire, and he's still half asleep, but he gets into this fighting stance and takes a couple swings at the guy. They finally get him hooked up, and they start running for the fire. There are some really nice fire sequences in it, of the flames moving around and, causing all sorts of havoc for this old guy who can't quite, escape the fire until Tom and Jerry get one of those little trampoline things down there. He jumps out of the window and he bounces off of it all the way back up through the chimney, back down into his house. It's a really well done sequence. We also get a little bit of cheesecake when this woman sort of jumps, and we get to see a little leg. It's 33. I'm thinking is still probably pre-code at that point. It's not like it's dirty or anything like that, but you get a little feminine pulchritude in this one. The final sequence is also pretty good, as the old guy chases the fire wagon away, and parts of the wagon start falling off and landing on top of him. So you get funny gags, you get inventive movement and inventive sequences, a little bit of cheesecake. All the things that we would see in Frank Tashlin's cartoon and live action comedies that are to come. Now, in 1933, he moved to Leon Schlesinger Productions, in other words, Warner Brothers. He might have had a little friction with his former bosses at Van Buren. Well, at Warner Brothers, he was known for being a really fast animator. Had enough time, in fact, in between doing things to start his own comic strip called Van Boring. Yeah, like I said, he might have had some issues with Van Buren. And it was, in fact, inspired by his old boss there. You can see a little sample of one of them there. Excellent cartooning. Again, you get great movement with still images, but great movement. It's almost like a storyboard for a cartoon. Now, when Tashlin wouldn't give Schlesinger a cut of his earnings from the comic strip, and I know that sounds crazy, but I think maybe even to this day, if you work for Walt Disney Animation, everything you draw, even in personal time, belongs to Walt Disney. It's one of the reasons that Walt Disney animators sometimes draw spicy things, because they know that those things have to go in the vault, even though they're offensive. So it was kind of a thing with animation, at least once upon a time. I think that might still be the case with Disney. I'm not sure, but Tashlin wasn't going to have anything to do with that, and so he quit. He would come back later on, though. So he did a couple years after Warner Brothers with Animated Process Corporation, and then he hooked up with Hal Roach Studios, writing gags for such luminaries as Laurel and Hardy. And one of the films that he worked on was called Tit for Tat from 1935. It is a great short subject. It involves this escalation of insults and injuries between the boys who have just opened up an electronics store and their neighbor who has a grocery store, and they got a little history with this guy. He thought that Hardy was messing with his wife at one point, so it's not a happy reunion between these people. There are very inventive bits in this involving this elevator. You know, remember they used to have those elevators in the basement and they would come up on the sidewalk, and you see this in old movies all the time. I suppose they still exist in New York. I don't know. But at one point, Stan is down there. He does the elevator, and this police officer is standing on top of it, raises him up. The police officer is not really thrilled with that. He does it again later on to Ollie, who's on this ladder trying to change light bulbs, goes up, crazy stunt, really cool. And it lands him on the windowsill outside the window of the wife of the grocer. And he ends up going in and going down the stairs, innocently enough. But it sets things off. It's a very similar concept to an older short that they did with Finlayson, where they're Christmas tree salesmen. And he's not happy to see them. Door-to-door Christmas tree salesman, by the way. He's not happy to see them. The two of them end up destroying his house and their car. It's pretty impressive. And it's kind of the same thing here. It starts when he pushes Stan into this box of light bulbs. And then it proceeds. Eventually we have those two basically pressing this giant can of lard down on his head, taking it off, and him so can you imagine being covered with lard? Oh, geez. And then, of course, he finally just destroys everything in their shop. Now, we obviously don't know, and we never will, which gags were written by which people. There's multiple people working on these things oftentimes. Obviously, Stan Laurel did a lot of the gag stuff himself. So we don't know what Tashlin did or didn't do. Point is, though, it is a funny short. And it kind of shows that he was picking up skills outside of animation. I mean, so far he's done animation. He's done a comic strip that was, successful enough to get published somewhere. And now he's doing live action and, with Laurel and Hardy of all things. Well, after Hal Roach, he would do another stint at Warner Brothers, taking over Friz Freleng's old unit when Friz went to MGM for a while. An argument with bosses got him fired. His unit would then be taken over by Chuck Jones. You noticing there's a little in and out. In 1938, he landed at Walt Disney Studios, and it's probably the best paying gig he'd ever had. Apparently, he and Roy Williams would pass the time by throwing a napping Clarence Ducky Nash out of windows. I'm guessing first floor windows. I don't think they were throwing him out of, tall buildings or anything like that. So he worked at Disney for a while. Then they had that strike. And after the strike, he left. He ended up going to Columbia and Screen Gems, where he served as director and producer until an argument with executives left him once again without a job. Again, we're seeing a pattern here. Now, Tashlin was restless. He was a wanderer. He was obviously stubborn. He stuck to his guns on things. But this also gave him, I think, a chance to work with a lot of different people in different systems, doing different things. And I think that's kind of led to him gaining the skills that he ultimately got in terms of making comedy. Now, while he was at Columbia, Tashlin and Alec Geist directed a cartoon called Dog Meets Dog in March of 1942. It involves one dog saving another from the dog catcher, and then a terrible betrayal. It's not as wild as the Looney Tunes stuff that he did, but high energy, kind of cute, some cute sight gags in it. In a few ways, it feels like a cross between a Warner Brothers cartoon and a Disney cartoon, stylistically and in terms of the humor. And also, with the addition of Pinto Colvig doing voice work in the picture, you hear Goofy and you think Disney, even if he's not being goofy. Tito's Guitar is this nice little short he did from October of 1942. He directed it with Bob Wickersham as well. Now, this one stars Tito and Burrito. And one of the reasons I'm highlighting it is because I just love Tito and Burrito. He's this little guy, plays his guitar, and he is going to elope with a girl that he likes, but her papa don't like him, so he's got to be very, very quiet. And of course, since it's a cartoon, if you've got to be really, really quiet, you're going to be anything but quiet. So there's a lot of craziness in this one. It's cute, has some cute gags in it, but again, lacks the raw energy that we would see him exhibit at Warner Brothers a little bit later on. But again, building those skills. Toll Bridge Troubles from November of 1942 is a Fox and Crow cartoon directed by Bob Wickersham and Frank Tashlin. Tashlin was very instrumental in establishing the Fox and Crow series, which did very, very well. And I think they made it into comic books as well. Very good series. It's another cartoon with a really lush look to it, good motion, great color in the thing. It involves Crow trying to scam Fox with a fake toll bridge. Lots of grudge and revenge gags in this one. Not too different from Tit for Tat, I guess, in a way. Just very solid cartooning. So you could see at this point in his career that Tashlin really had the skills. Well, 1942 saw him back at Warner Brothers, at least for a couple of years. And it was during this period that he made some really excellent cartoons. And that's where we're going to focus a lot of our attention here. We're going to look at a few of them. We're not going to look at all of them because there's just too many to look at. And honestly, a few of my absolute favorite cartoons of all time, I'm not even covering here because I could probably do this video about Tashlin cartoons for like a couple hours. They're really, really good. But we are going to start with Porky Pig's Feet from July of 1943. It was the last black and white Porky cartoon. And in it, Porky and Daffy are trying to escape a hotel without paying the bill because they don't have any money. It is a really, really good cartoon. You get sight gags in it like the bill here. You get these wild takes. You get crazy stunts. The manager falling down the stairs. I mean, it's because Daffy pulled a rug out from under him, but it is absolutely amazing. And you could see he gets some really interesting camera angles, this Frank. And people had said, well, part of that was because he had worked in live action. And he had a better eye for the virtual camera placement and for, doing these pan shots and all this stuff. It is in a really amazing sequence of him going down those stairs. If you are an animator, if you love animation, and you've never watched this cartoon, you should go check it out just for that alone. And of course, we get a Bugs Bunny cameo at the end. Every frame of this thing is an absolute work of art. A Corny Concerto came out in September of 1943. Now, Tashlin did the story on this one. Sometimes he directed, sometimes he was just doing stories. Supervision was by Bob McKimson. Of course, he's known for a lot of the Foghorn Leghorn cartoons. Now, this one is in the public domain, and so it's had many viewings out there. It is composed of two parts. The first is a waltz by Johann Strauss, which is what we're going to look at here. So it's a little bit like Fantasia, right? It's animation set to music, and it might have even been them doing kind of a parody of Fantasia. I'm not sure timing-wise if Fantasia was out yet at this point, but it's very reminiscent in terms of its style of Bob Clampett. Character design, the movement, the craziness of it. So, Tashlin, again, didn't direct. He didn't necessarily have control over those aspects, but his style of comedy worked well with the Clampett style. And the gags he wrote are absolutely solid. It revolves around Porky and his dog hunting Bugs Bunny. Lots of wild takes, lots of outrageous images, such as that one. This is after he believes Bugs has been shot and he has his hands over his chest and Porky pulls them apart and Bugs is wearing, well, I don't know if it's technically a bra, but it's basically a bra. It kind of illustrates the whole concept, boobs in the woods. A unique wry sense of humor from Tashlin is not as evident in this one. It's all set to music. There's really not much in the way of talking, so kind of makes sense. You can't make wry little asides when you don't speak, but it's a lot of the Warner Brothers stock in trade, but very funny and absolutely great gags in this one. Beautifully done. Now, the home front from November of 1943 was a cartoon in the Private Snafu series. Now, with the Private Snafu series, which were done for the U.S. military, basically propaganda films, but they were all designed around Snafu being basically an idiot. So it's like, don't behave like this guy, and we'll show you why you shouldn't behave like this guy. But since they were intended for adults, Tashlin could get a little bit spicier with the humor, such as this early joke about it being cold enough to freeze the nuts off of a Jeep. It concerns this soldier, Snafu, griping about how soft everybody has it back home. He's freezing here. Everybody back home, they're just having a good time. They don't care about him. His dad, his mom, his grandpa is at the burlesque. And I might actually get in trouble if I showed you the sequence with the strippers in this one, so you get to see grandpa instead. And of course, his best girl, she's probably running around with wolves. Well, of course, Snafu is wrong. They're all pitching into the war effort. These shorts, like I say, they were propaganda. But, propaganda doesn't necessarily mean false. But they're also really entertaining. And they give you a kind of a glimpse into what cartoons for grown-ups might have looked like in the 1940s if they'd, really been allowed to do cartoons just for grown-ups. And I think that more adult sense of humor works well with Frank Tashlin. Booby Hatched from October 1944 is just one of my favorites. And it's one of the cartoons that made me a lot more aware of Frank Tashlin as a director and what he brought to the game. The cartoon concerns this duck that has not managed to hatch completely from his egg, while all of his siblings have. His mother goes off with them. He's left kind of, to freeze in this terrible winter. So he goes out looking for mama. And at the same time, he's being stalked by a hungry wolf. It has this particular sequence that I love. And I think it sets Tashlin's humor apart from Clampett and Avery, even though he does a lot of very Clampett, Avery kind of things. But he does a little bit more. So the little egg-bound duck, he ends up walking into this cave and finding this hibernating bear. And he immediately scurries underneath him to get warm. The bear slowly raises his leg. He sees the egg, puts his leg back down, takes a pause, and says to the audience, so breaking the fourth wall, "So I laid an egg." Clampett, Avery, it tends to just move. Tashlin could slow it down a little bit for these weird asides that almost remind you more of something you would get like in a later Chuck Jones cartoon. Well, the wolf then appears and decides that dynamite is the best way to get the bear off of the egg. So he puts it under there, lights it, dynamite explodes, launches the bear onto the ceiling. Wolf steals the egg, bear falls back down into place, opens his eyes and says to the audience, "Dreams like this worry me, See, that's the Tashlin thing. It's very Clampett. It's that high energy. But then you get these weird little asides sometimes from the characters that are just really funny. In I Got Plenty of Mutton from March of 1944, we get another hungry wolf. So they often went into that kind of fairy tale wolf, Red Riding Hood stuff in these cartoons because really they're just looking for an excuse to write gags. And again, Tashlin was a really good gag guy. It's the reason sitcoms do the same thing. It's just the situation doesn't matter. It's what we do with the situation. And by the way, a lot of wolves that he works with from a guy who often was fighting with executives and management. So I wonder if he was saying something there. But in this one, you can really see the extremes in terms of poses that Tashlin used. Again, very much like, Bob Clampett and Tex Avery. He also liked that sort of really fast movement, then stop, and then fast movement again, a kind of a combo that, again, you would get from Chuck Jones later on. When the local sheepdog enters the draft, this wolf sees an opportunity to get some mutton, and it's kind of like a more madcap version of Chuck Jones's. It wasn't really Wile E. Coyote, but he looks like Wile E. Coyote and the sheepdog. Except this one turns into Wolf versus Ram, which then almost turns into a Pepe Le Pew style thing. There's fourth wall breaking. Not much voice work, just a little bit. So we don't get too many odd asides, but you could really see how beautifully he could craft a frame, how beautifully he could model these characters in his particular style. Again, it's close to Clampett, but it's not quite Clampett. It's just really, you could tell the man knew his cartooning. You get the wolf dressing up in this like a sheep, and the ram trying to make love to him. I mean, using the old term, not the new term. Again, this wasn't a Private Snafu cartoon, but just a really good showcase for a style and an extremely funny cartoon. Plain Daffy from September 1944 is another war cartoon, somewhat reminiscent of Private Snafu. And Tashlin, he might have been the last Warner Brothers director to really do, like sexy sort of women. Okay, I know she's a bird, but still sexy women in cartoons. Obviously, Avery, well known for Red Hot Riding Hood, Swing Shift Cinderella, but that was for MGM. That was like that early core of animators, directors. It seems like that you got less of that as you went, but this is a good example of it. In this one, these carrier pigeons are beset by an Axis spy trying to get information out of them. I'm telling you, Jessica Rabbit has nothing on this dame. Well, the job ultimately falls to Daffy, the squadron woman hater. She won't get to first base with him, or vice versa. Of course, then again, he might be overstating his case. You get really good special effects in this one. Great gags, beautiful animation, wild takes, Jerry Colonna impressions, classic Daffy moves. Tashlin was one of the last directors, to me, who really did a proper Daffy Duck. And we all know Daffy eventually turns into kind of a different character with Chuck Jones, but the original Daffy was, insane. And you get that in Tashlin's cartoons for sure. Cartoon just has it all. And it occurs to me that Tashlin really was able to kind of combine the fluidity of Clampett's animation with that really nice look that Avery got. He was the best of both worlds with Frank Tashlin. Well, the secret is finally revealed when she catches Daffy and puts him in front of an X-ray machine. So he swallowed a note. You can see what it says on it. And old Adolf is watching, and the note says, Hitler is a stinker. And Hitler exclaims, "Hitler is a stinker? That's no secret." And Goebbels and Goering both reply, "Yeah, everybody knows that." So it's a classic war cartoon. We're mocking the Axis, as they so richly deserved. But, again, look at the caricatures there. They are fantastic and a little different from the caricatures you saw those characters in other cartoons. He really did have his own style. We'll sort of close out this section on Warner Brothers cartoons from this period with another one of my favorites called Nasty Quacks from December 1945. Nasty Quacks shows that, again, Tashlin could do facial expressions as well as that later era Chuck Jones did. And he was kind of doing it before he did it. So I keep saying this, but when you're looking at a Tashlin cartoon, a lot of times if you didn't see who the director was, you're going, "Oh, it's Clampett." Well, no, it's almost Chuck Jones. If it seems like it may be coming from either of those guys, it's probably coming from Frank Tashlin. And like I said, he was also really good at sort of slowing things down for funny asides in between the madcap crazy action. But you do get a lot of the madcap stuff. And I think that helped him when he moved back into live action, because obviously if you're doing a full-length feature film, live action, it just can't be at a breakneck pace the entire movie. It's very difficult to do. It's got to slow down every once in a while so the audience can catch their breath. And Tashlin was able to do that even in 7-minute cartoons. You get this sprawling butter knife sword fight through this thing, which again shows his ability to do the camera pans, to get the crazy angles. Really good at that kind of stuff. But, eventually his tenure with Warner did finally end for good. Left the studio again in 1944. McKimson took over his unit. He wound up making some stop motion animation for John Sutherland. Now, one of the shorts that he did was called The Lady Said No. And it is really, really impressive. It was kind of a lost film. You can find it now on YouTube, though. And I suggest you take a look at it. It is about this little Mexican fellow who has a thing for a beautiful girl, whose lips say no, but whose eyes say yes. Or in this case, her eyelashes say yes. It's really impressive model work throughout. Part of it's in color, part of it's in black and white. I think that's just how they were able to save this thing. There's really nice special effects that blend traditional animation with the stop motion. There's this little song that goes on with these three guys, and you can kind of make them out here. It's a little difficult to get a good shot of them, but they will sing sort of between the segments. The first one is him, flirting with her, and then there's courting and the first date, and then you get a wedding, and then you get children, and boy, you get a lot of children, and they will pop up in unlikely places to sing this cute little song. It's very nice. The little guy reminds me a little bit of Cantinflas. Excellent little film. And like I said, apparently it was almost lost, but you can find it now. But again, it shows this guy, it's like, how many people are, working as a cartoonist, working as an animator, writing gags for live action, directing cartoons, then doing stop motion as well. He was restless, he was creative, but he had a tremendous store of skills and experience that he brought to each phase of his career. Well, after the stint with Sutherland, he made a big move back into live action. He started writing gags for the Marx Brothers and A Night in Casablanca, which is from the we have to make another movie or the mob's going to break Chico's legs phase of their career. So it's not the greatest movie in the world, but he's writing gags for them, writes gags for Lucille Ball in Miss Grant Takes Richmond, does gags for Red Skelton, and maybe most importantly, for Bob Hope. Tashlin actually stepped in as director to finish Hope's Christmas movie, The Lemon Drop Kid, in 1951. So we got some solid live-action comedy directing experience from that one. And in 1956, he got his first big directorial success with The Girl Can't Help It from 20th Century Fox. Movie is a rock and roll musical starring Jane Mansfield. And I'll tell you what, Mansfield was probably about as close to a cartoon, hottie that you were ever going to get in real life. So it makes sense that Tashlin would be involved in this. There's this excellent bit where she's walking through a neighborhood and you get the reaction of these three men. It is pure Looney Tunes, starting with the guy who's melting ice while he looks at her walk by. And then the milkman, the milk bottle erupts. I'm sure they're not suggesting anything there at all. And then this one guy, old guy getting his newspaper, sees her walking up these stairs and his glasses shatter while he's looking at her. So there's a lot of this kind of funny cartoony stuff in it, but it's not all just madcap insanity. It is a smart movie. It is a funny movie, and it is even a little bit heartfelt, and it has some really, really good music in it. If you've never watched it, you might want to check it out. It was followed by a very successful run of comedies. Martin and Lewis's Hollywood or Bust, Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, and 6 of Jerry Lewis's early solo films, Rockabye Baby, The Geisha Boys, Cinderfella, It's Only Money, Who's Minding the Store, and The Disorderly Orderly. Now, I'll admit to not being a huge fan of Jerry Lewis, but if any living actor was going to replace Daffy Duck, live action, he is the one. So he worked perfectly with Frank Tashlin and his comedic skills. Now, along the way, Tashlin wrote 3 ostensibly children's books, but they're pretty smart children's books. The Bear That Wasn't in 1946, The Possum That Didn't in 1950, and The World That Isn't in 1951. The Bear That Wasn't was turned into a cartoon by old colleague Chuck Jones in 1967, if you want to check that out. And the bear also made an appearance, at least on the cover, in Tashlin's 1952 book, How to Create Cartoons, and this book is spectacular. And in terms of graphic design, it is like ahead of its time. You open this thing up and you don't feel like you're looking at something from 1956, other than the style of the cartooning. If you draw cartoons, I suggest you go check it out. You can find it on the Internet Archive. Actually, if you don't even draw at all, or you just like drawings, check this thing out. It is really, really amazing. So what can you say about Frank Tashlin? A bit of a rebel, restless, a wanderer, dabbling in numerous art forms and doing all of them well, from comic strips to animated cartoons to live action to children's books. He was maybe never a household name, but surely he is one of the greatest comedians of the 20th century. And DadsDen salutes you. Now go out, watch some of his cartoons, watch some of his movies, and see for yourself how good this guy is. He's really quite amazing. Well, that'll do it for DadsDen of Pop Culture today. If you enjoyed this little salute to Frank Tashlin, please give it a like, maybe subscribe, maybe share with a friend. That would be very cool. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. Watch some Frank Tashlin, and hopefully I will see you soon in DadsDen of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.